Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by author Gwendolyn Kiste to talk about her new short story collection, The Haunted Houses She Calls Her Own, and fairy tale horror. So, Gwendolyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm such a fan. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh my god, I'm so excited. I feel like I have been a fan and a reader for a long time, and you've been mentioned on the show many times, but it's your first appearance, like, being
Yes.
here.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
So, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your collection?
Absolutely. So, The Haunted Houses She Calls Her Own is my second fiction collection. It's 16 stories, 13 previously published, 3 new, and it really explores a lot of fairy tale horror, which is why we're talking about that today. But there's also like a lot of film related horror and just some retellings. So, yeah, like it's really spans a number of years in my short fiction writing, and I'm super excited. It's coming out on April 14th from Raw Dog Screaming Press.
And I loved the collection. I had such a good time with it. And I wanted to ask, like, I feel like in your writing, you do such a great job of giving these like tertiary female characters a chance to kind of like tell their own side of the story or a chance to like, fight back or change the narrative. And do you remember the first time you came across a character in like fairy tales or literature where you were like, no, I need to hear what's going on with her? Like, she's got something to say.
Yeah, it actually was, I think, Lucy from Dracula. So I do think that
Really?
that's the one. I remember it like very early on, maybe 5, 6 years old, and like hearing about Dracula, and I would always ask like what about female characters in any stories, and I was told, there's basically two female characters in Dracula, Mina who lives and Lucy who dies, and I'm like, what happens to Lucy? And so like it was like I said, I was probably 5 or 6. I was really little, and so I do think that and the short story, The Eight People Who Murdered Me, is in this collection. So, and ultimately that went on to inspire my novel Reluctant Immortals. So I really took that initial like let's see it from her perspective and really went all out with it.
I love that. I do have an upcoming episode. It's already been recorded, but about like Dracula retellings or like reimaginings. And I do mention your short story in it. And I was talking to Annette when we were recording it. I'm like, I wish I had had your like feminist cred at like 5 or 6 because I read Dracula at 14, like steeped heavily in like evangelical purity culture. And I was like, well,
Mhm.
she's flirty. So that's what you get. Sorry.
Honestly, though, like there's a lot of that in the story, and then there's unfortunately still a lot of that even now. So it's like so much of our thinking has to be rewired the older that we get. It's terrible,
Yeah.
especially as women. It's like there's so much of like, no, this isn't somebody else's fault, even though we're being told it's our fault or someone else's fault. It's wild. It's really wild.
Yeah. Well, especially in your story, it is kind of aimed at the way society at large, but like specific people have let Lucy down. Like she is
Yeah.
addressing specific people.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
And you also have like a Bluebeard story in here.
Yes, yes, that's her Skin a Grim Canvas, and yeah, it kind of Bluebeard meets the fashion world, and the main character is basically the muse, yet another muse for this well-known fashion designer. So yeah, like I love the fashion industry, but I also think it is very toxic. It's this kind of thing that I love beautiful clothes, and I love like editorial style photography, and there's so many things about it that I love, but it's also very toxic and kind of reckoning with that, and then putting in the Bluebeard legend sort of on top of that was an interesting experience as the writer.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that story. I also really liked Sister Glitter Blood.
Oh, thank you.
I think just like the juxtaposition of it being this like kind of glittery, girly game, but it being this
Yeah.
like horrifyingly violent story. I was like, I love this.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of board games, so that one was really fun to, like, write from the perspective of, like, a board game instructions as these girls are realizing that this very, like you said, very glittery, seemingly fun game is very dangerous to them.
Yeah, I just love that juxtaposition. Like, I love it in battle royale, like, when the students are
Mhm.
all sitting in the classroom and they get the video explaining the rules of battle royale, and it's this
Mhm.
very perky woman that's like, "You're all gonna get weapons. Some of you may get good weapons. Some of you may get bad weapons."
I haven't seen that in years. I need to go back and rewatch it. I loved it when I saw it. Loved it
Uh,
in that way of like it seemed so reflective of the world we live in. You know, you could see it happening
yes.
in real life, which is terrifying.
Well, since we are talking about fairy tales, I wanted to ask about, like, your personal history with fairy tales. Were you someone who was, like, told fairy tales growing up as a
You
child?
know,
Did you seek them out yourself?
yeah, I mean, I think my first exposure, and this is like, the most obvious answer, what was probably through Disney fairy tales. I remember watching like The Little Mermaid and Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and Seven Dwarfs and kind of Beauty and the Beast, all when I was very young. So it was like that was my initial exposure to them. But then I remember when I looked into like the original stories, they were so much more horrifying. Like the Little Mermaid is such a depressing story. Like it is not what Disney made it to be. It's, terrible. Like you're going to turn into sea foam. And like even though she ends up kind of ascending at the end, I mean spoiler for the original like fairy tale of the Little Mermaid, it's still a terrible ending. Like it's not a happy ending at all. And so that horrified me. I remember going into a bookstore when I was really little and looking at the end of The Little Mermaid in the book, and I'm like, "No, this can't be right," and being very upset about it. So I remember the stress. I still remember that bookstore and being like, "No, this is not okay."
Oh, man, yeah, this is not what Disney told me.
Exactly.
My familiarity with fairy tales also came mainly from whatever Disney versions
Mhm.
we got.
Mhm.
So I remember kind of around middle school, uh, early middle school, kind of that age where, people, like, don't believe in Santa anymore, and they
Mhm.
kind of wanna be like, "Hey, do you know what really happens in The Little Mermaid? Do you know what Ring Around the Rosie is really about?" And I was always
Yeah.
the person that's like, "Wait, what? No way."
I love that. But yeah, so many of these things have such terrifying origins. They're just so ready-made for horror, and they really kind of are, in a lot of ways, the original horror stories. It's like ghost stories. I feel like are some of the oldest horror stories, and then fairy tales are some of the oldest horror stories. Even though a lot of people don't think of it that way, but they're cautionary tales, and terrible things happen sometimes to
Yes.
decent people. And so it's like it's not always that these kids were terrible. It's just like they did something like minor and then it's like that tiny transgression of like don't go into the forest and it's like, well that's it. The forest ate you. Like it's terrible.
I mean, that is true. That's the way that they prepared children for, like, the
Yeah.
very real dangers of the hard
Mhm.
world they were living
Yeah.
in. Like, yeah, there is
Yeah.
a sea monster that grabs people that go into the water at night, so don't go in there by yourself at night.
Exactly. Exactly.
Kind of just tying this into movies now, for this episode, I finally got around to watching The Company of Wolves.
Yay.
And I feel like it does that so well because we have the
Mhm.
Angela Lansbury character who is telling these stories to her
Mhm.
granddaughter, and you see, like, very clearly that they are all cautionary tales.
Mhm.
You had already
Mhm.
seen that.
Yes, yes, I love this. I mean, I love Angela Carter, and that's it's based on her short story collection. So, I actually think I read some of her short fiction in like a college class, and then I sought out this movie, a number of years ago now, and I think it's a good adaptation. I think she wrote the screenplay, so it's like she did a good job of adapting her
Interesting.
own work. Yeah, and so I think it's a very good like visual representation, and directed by Neil Jordan, and yeah, I really love this movie, and I love, there's like the great scene with all the wolves and like the outfits and like the at the table, and it's just got some great visuals. Not all of the visuals are necessarily in the original short story collection, but I do love how they interpreted it. I think it was a really great job.
The transformation scene took me by surprise. Like, I thought they did a fantastic job for it being what
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And it's very creepy. It's got this very kind of like it's beautiful and yet almost kind of surreal and almost a little gritty at times. Like there's this
Yes.
just darkness to it that I think it balances very well of like, yes, this is a fairy tale, but it's also pretty scary. And so yeah, it really I think it does that very, very well. I love that adaptation so much.
Yeah, it was just an absolute surprise for me because my friend suggested it because we had watched another entry on this list as part of our Cult Criterion project. We watched Valerie and Her Week of Wonders,
Yeah.
which is also like very fairy tale.
Mhm.
It's a like Czechoslovakian new wave movie from the
Mhm.
70s. But yeah, it
Mhm.
opens up with this girl getting her period and then goes
Mhm.
into this very surreal,
Mhm.
dreamlike
Yeah.
state where there's like vampires and
Mhm.
witches
Yeah.
and but it's so like gauzy and
Yes.
light and like
Mhm.
beautiful. At no point did I really understand what was going on, and I felt like that was kinda maybe part of it.
Yeah, I think so.
Girlhood is confusing. Growing
Yeah,
up is
it's
weird and confusing.
exactly, exactly. It very much feels like what adolescence is like. It is so confusing and strange. And I do think it's just a very dreamlike film. I think the reason I initially sought it out a number of years ago is because I'd read that Angela Carter was influenced by Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. So it's interesting to me that you have Valerie and Her Week of
Interesting.
Wonders. Then that influenced, you know, Angela Carter's fiction, which then
Yeah.
became the movie The Company of Wolves. So it's like, it kind of all moves through. And I thought that was really fascinating. So I think that was when I first sought out that movie because I was like, okay, well, I'm influenced by Angela Carter. I want to see what influenced her. So I'm like, yeah. And so it kind of
Yeah.
moves through in that way that it's like, I always think it's interesting as a creator when you are inspired by someone and then you find out what they were inspired by. Because in a way, even if you haven't seen that, you're being inspired by that too, because they were inspired by it and you're
Yeah.
inspired by them. So it's like, I kind of like to know what the influences are to know, that kind of lineage of those types of stories.
Well, since having seen it, I now that I watch those, like, Criterion Closet videos, I, like, love seeing who picks it, like, Florence Welch picked Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, and she's like, "This movie was really important to me," and I'm like, "Oh, I see it. I
Yeah,
see the
right? Yeah, I can
influence."
totally see that. That's so funny. I love that. That's so perfect.
Oh, man, for this episode, I also watched The Ugly Stepsister, Academy Award nominee, The Ugly
Yeah, that's right.
Stepsister,
It
and
was, right? Yeah.
oh my god, that was a wild ride.
It's a distressing movie. It's a distressing movie. There's a lot of body
Yes.
horror. There's a ton of body horror, which there is a lot of body horror in fairy tales. I mean, the transformations, and then in particular with Cinderella and what the stepsisters do to themselves. I remember being shocked when I learned that as a kid. It's like, oh, they did all these terrible things to their bodies to try to be perfect. And as a kid, I'm like, what? Like, it was horrifying. It was so scary.
Well, yeah, like, that's what I mean, like, this movie really didn't change all that much about what happens in the Cinderella story. So, yeah, I would say not one for someone with a weak stomach, but I really loved it. I started it, seeing that this was labeled as a comedy, and I was a little nervous about that, but then I
Yeah.
having seen it, I'm like, "Oh, no, it needs that levity to lighten things up because it would be
Yeah.
unwatchable."
Yeah.
Truly
Yeah.
without the comedy. But yeah, this is a story told from the perspective of, the ugly stepsister, like, her mother marries this, like, seemingly wealthy old man with a beautiful daughter, and her sister, move into this palatial house, and I just love that she is so like, young and naive, and the prince has published this, like, collection of poetry, and she has this, like, dream idealized version of him that she, like, keeps going back to, where she's, like, getting swept off her feet by this prince, and even when she meets him, she still, like, keeps this
Yeah.
vision of him
Mhm.
as, like, his role of the prince, and yeah, she has this pressure to marry the prince for financial reasons after
Mhm.
her stepdad dies, and oof. The sewing of the eyelashes, really got me as an eye trauma
Yeah.
person.
Mhm. Yeah, eyes really freak me out. Like, any kind of eye horror always scares me because it's like, no, no. eyes are so delicate. Like, I don't think most people think about how delicate their eyes really are and how much we use them regularly, you know? So it's like, yeah, that eye trauma is a real thing.
Eye trauma and, like, I just there's certain things I don't wanna think about, like how like, your pupil is like a hole. I don't wanna think about that. That's beyond me. No, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
I don't wanna know that.
That doesn't necessarily bother me. I always love when we go to the eye doctor. They do this thing called the optomap, where it's like they don't have to dilate your eyes as often. And I hate having my eyes dilated because, like, I feel like I'm sun sensitive, anyways. And so they do this thing and they can show you the inside of your eyes. Like, it's this huge, like, blown up picture on the screen. And it's like, here's your optic nerve, and here's all this, and this looks healthy. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's good. I'm glad that that looks great. That
Yeah.
way I don't have to have my eyes dilated and I'm not having any, like, impending doom for my eyes.
Yeah, I meant to get around to watching, Hansel and Gretel. Was that Ari Aster's Hansel and Gretel? I don't remember if he directed it or not.
We talked about Hansel and Gretel, but I wasn't sure which version. Like, there's been a couple, but okay.
I did not get around to watching it, but
Yeah, like, I've seen a couple over the years, but, like, yeah. I I like the Hansel and Gretel story, but I've never really seen an adaptation that's, like, really lit me up and, like, that's the one. Even though I think it's fascinating, but at the same time, I hate that the witch is always bad. I'm like, "No, I don't love that about fairy tales that when the witches are bad because I think it's just a way of making people afraid of women, which ironically is like, it's more likely to be men to hurt children than women
yeah,
anyways, but like they were like scaring children away from like the women. But yeah,
yeah.
or witches.
I think I liked in, Jennifer Egan's follow-up to the Goon Squad, it's called The Candy House, and it is about how, like, tech is the candy house that offers you, like, this free access to things, but it's always gonna cost you something, and it's gonna cost you
Mhm.
more than, like, you think at, like, the expense of your privacy.
Okay, I haven't read that. I'll have to look into that. Okay.
It's like a
Yeah.
bunch of it's like the Goon Squad in that you're following similar characters and, like, interconnected short stories, and,
Okay.
like, the social media in this is, like, you can upload your, like, memories or your, like,
Ooh.
consciousness.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
It's interesting, but I liked that as
Yeah.
a metaphor. I was like, "I do
Yeah.
like the Hansel and Gretel tech metaphor here."
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to look into that one 'cause that sounds like up my alley. Have you seen The Lure? That one was on there.
I haven't seen it. I started it, and then I didn't get
Yeah,
to finish it.
yeah. Well, I won't spoil it, but the ending makes me sad. It's like it's not a happy ending, which The Little Mermaid wasn't a happy ending.
Oh.
We were just talking about that, but it's like it makes me sad. Now I've totally spoiled it for you. I'm sorry.
Oh,
But yeah.
honestly, justice for mermaids, okay? Which I
Right?
think well, don't you do in your story, the sea witch,
That's true.
right?
Yes,
The
justice for
sea
mermaids.
witch
I
at the
love
World's
that.
Fair.
I'm actually writing that down. Justice for mermaids. I love it. It's true. I feel like mermaids have been done really dirty by fairy tales. But yes, and the sea witch of the World's Fair, like that my little sea monster slash mermaid. She does okay. We'll say that's a little bit of a spoiler, but I've got a lot of good for her vibes in a lot of my work, so I don't think that's
Yeah.
necessarily a huge shock to anybody.
I mean, I feel like I see that, and I feel like, well, in the fairy tales, we have the, like, mother, maiden, crone
Yeah.
archetypes, and I feel like, you do a lot for each one.
Yeah, I try to. I try to. Yeah, I feel like so often women in real life, but even in fiction, get reduced to such like almost tropes or the expectations put on us. And I'm always like anything to kind of combat that because I'm like, no, like life can be so many different things. And I feel like we're kind of told that it's like, nope, you got to stay in your lane. And there's only like one lane. And it's ridiculous because it's just, we don't do that to men to the degree that we do it to women to some degree too. And I always say that, like, I think we're just awful to everybody. I just think we're worse to some people. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't necessarily think
Yeah.
there's anybody out there that is being treated great by society right now. I think we're all pretty
Yeah.
terrible to each other. That's nice and positive, right? But yeah, the world is very scary
Mhm.
right now. So yeah.
You also had, I don't know if I'm gonna pronounce this right. La Belle et la Bete?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's La Belle et la Bête. I think. I remember watching it actually in my French class, in I was in high school, but I was taking college classes, so it's kind of weird. It's like a college class, but I was like a senior in high school. So, and that was where I first saw it, and I love it. I think it's really great. It's got a lot of cool visuals, and it's an old one. I think it's from like the 1940s, and but it stuck with
Mhm.
me. And I think about the imagery a lot of times because I think the imagery really went on to impact a lot of other cinema over the years. It's very, very beautiful movies. So yeah, I mean, if you ever get around to it, it's a lot of fun. And even if you don't get around to it, look up like even just like do a Google search and you can see some of the just neat, like there's like hands coming out of the wall, kind of like holding torches. And it's just it's very surreal. It was really
Oh,
that
yeah.
kind of extension of the surrealism of like the 30s and 40s. So it's a very neat, it's a
Ooh,
neat adaptation.
okay. That sounds up my alley. I do love surreal.
Yeah, yeah. It's fun.
Are we ready to get into some books?
Sure.
I can start us off with Lost Boy: The True Story of Captain Hook by Christina Henry. I remember picking this up years ago and absolutely loving it, and I think Christina Henry published kind of a few of these. She did, like, Lost Boy, and then I think she did, like, 2 or 3, like, Alice in Wonderland, like, dark retellings. So, I
Yeah.
feel like this was, like, her lane for a bit. I loved
Yeah.
this one. I have never really been a Peter Pan apologist. Maybe it's, like, the eldest daughter in me. I don't know. The copy from the back I've always liked, where it's like, there's one version of my story that everyone knows, and then there's the truth. This is how it happened, how I went from being Peter Pan's first and favorite lost boy to his greatest enemy. And when you open
Oh.
up, like, it's the story of Captain Hook, but his name was Jamie, and, he was the first lost boy, like, he and Peter did
Ooh.
everything together, and it kinda seems like the magic of Neverland comes
Mhm.
from, like, your adoration for Peter, and as
Yes.
he, like,
Yes.
matures, um, and some of that starts to slip, like, there's
Yeah.
less of that, and there's this, like,
Mhm.
chasm between them. And one thing I
Mhm.
think she did so well is how she made Peter Pan this, like, very, like, narcissistic, abusive guy who relies on, like, gaslighting and
Mhm.
manipulation and kind of, like, cult tactics of, like, we're a
Yes.
group, like, everything is for the group. And so then, anything Jamie did really put him on, like, the outs of it, and how, like, it was easy to paint this narrative that, like, he is the enemy to our group and our cause,
Yeah.
and thus, like, your best interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would say rating-wise, this is a fridge. I would say it's room temperature for most of it, but I mean, it's Captain Hook and he's missing a hand, so you gotta get to that part eventually. Like a ticking clock inside an alligator, you hear it and it's coming.
I love
Um,
it.
but it's very lyrical and immersive, and you get so swept up in it. I would say it's not too bloody, like, throughout until you get to, the Captain Hook part. The Captain Hook part of it all. But that is, Lost Boy: The True Story of Captain Hook by Christina Henry.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I'll actually stick with Peter Pan as well and suggest Wendy Darling by A.C. Wise, which
Ooh.
is also a really just beautifully written retelling from Wendy's perspective of the Peter Pan story. And I actually remember when AC published her, like, I think it was only I think it was a flash story that this actually, I think, grew from. And that was a number of years ago. I believe it was in Daily Science Fiction. And I remember reading that, and it's like, Peter shows up and he's like, being his terrible Peter self. And that's what I think grew into this story. And then I think she also did a sequel called Hooked. So there's like Wendy Darling and Hooked, and they're both just very beautiful
Ooh.
stories that are retellings of Peter Pan. I'm like you. I was never a Peter Pan apologist. I actually didn't really like that particular Disney cartoon. I think because he was so toxic. I think even as a kid, I'm like, this seems terrible. I wouldn't want to go to Neverland. He's a jerk. This is awful. So it was like I actually really love the ones that are like, yeah, it's totally awful. Cause I'm like, yeah, my little kid self would 100% agree.
Just like, "No, thank you. Not for
Yeah.
me." All right. My next pick is Chlorine by Jade Song, which I don't think really touts itself as like a fairy tale
Mhm.
retelling, but it
Mhm.
definitely makes the nods to it because it is very mermaid adjacent. There's a mermaid tail
Mhm.
on the cover.
Mhm.
You are following
Mhm.
Ren, who is a Chinese American teen swimmer in Pittsburgh. Whoop, whoop. And becomes obsessed with the idea that she is a mermaid. And this is a very dark coming of age story, and it is very full of rage. Like, if you love stories about,
Ooh.
like, female
Mhm.
rage, this is
Yeah.
perfect. It's a debut. It's beautiful, it's lyrical, it's very, like, unhinged, weird girl. Um, but, she is a competitive swimmer, and so she is constantly under all this pressure to be the best and get a
Yeah.
scholarship. She has this very
Mhm.
demanding, abusive coach. She is also like the daughter of immigrants and has like a tough family situation. So it's like, yeah, you as the reader completely understand why she would be like, actually, I just don't belong here at all. I'm not human. I'm something else. I'm kind of
Mhm.
noping out of all this. Like, you think I'm going to do this, and I'm not. Like, you
Mhm.
misunderstand me. I don't belong here. And I'm like, oh, that feels very teen girl.
Yeah.
It notes like the Little Mermaid, where she's in the first chapter, she's talking about her love of mermaids and, yeah, about justice to mermaids and how, like, they are stronger and more capable than you think, and, like, not the Disney stuff that you've been told your whole life. But I loved this. I would say this is Fridge with a possible freezer ending. It is very, like I said, dark, literary, weird girl lit until the end, where we take a turn for body horror.
Nice. Nice. Oh yeah. I love body horror. Again, I think, fairy tales have done that so well over the years, which is fantastic. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, the themes of transformation, and that's like
Yes.
we said, we didn't even have to change much about the ugly stepsister, and everyone's
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god, the body horror in this," and I'm like, canonical body horror
Canonical,
by
right?
me.
It's totally true. It is. It's canonical. It's like so many of us were raised on these more sanitized versions of the stories, but they're very scary. They're very scary. I want to bring up the work of Damien Angelica Walters. I actually think she hasn't released a book in a few years now, but she did some great fairy tale retellings, especially in her short fiction. I loved her first short fiction collection. I believe it was her first, Sing Me Your Scars. And the title story is like a Frankenstein adaptation, which I feel like Frankenstein
Oh,
is almost like that kind of fairy tale at this point. I always think it's
yeah.
interesting when things start to become fairy tale over time, because it's like, you know some of them are such old stories we don't know where they came from, right? But some of them, like Peter Pan, is one that we know who wrote it. There's certain ones we know who the at least the person who in some cases wrote it down. But I think with Peter Pan, J.M. Barrie did just write it. It wasn't a previous story that he then wrote down the way the Grimm brothers wrote. There's the stories down that had been passed along. But it is interesting when it's like these stories that are really part of literature then become almost their own mythology, and then they almost become a fairy tale, and like, where do we draw that line? And I think, Damien Angelica Walters does a great job in her short fiction of sort of exploring, fairy tales and mythology, and sometimes even bringing it into modern day. So I would definitely recommend all pretty much all of her
Oh,
short fiction, but starting with her collection, Sing Me Your Scars. I love that one.
I will add that to my list. Okay. I have House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin C. Craig, which is a YA horror retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses,
Oh,
which was
oh.
not a fairy tale I was familiar with going into
No.
this.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I heard of it as an adult, but I definitely had never come across it as a kid. That one was not one that I ever read or found anywhere.
But this is like kind of a gothic seaside take on it. And it's like there's 12 sisters that live in this like seaside castle, and you are following the perspective of the sixth sister, and five of her sisters have died, like increasingly awful deaths.
Yeah.
And there's this curse on her family, and she has to obviously get to the bottom of this curse and what is killing off her sisters. Like, her dad has recently remarried a terrible woman. Um, as you know,
Yeah,
as fairy tales.
the adults are always such failures to the children in fairy tales because so many of these stories wouldn't happen if an adult was just around to support the kids.
Oh man, but Annalie is the protagonist we're following, and she starts getting these visions of death. And so for a lot of the book, she doesn't know like what she can trust and what is real and what is not real. Like I remember reading it and she gets like a vision while she's in the bathtub that felt very like a Nightmare on Elm Street. And I was like,
Oh,
I kind of love that in this like YA gothic story. I don't know, maybe sisters go dance in a dreamland at nighttime, plus we have to figure out why everyone is dying type of deal. And maybe there's like a cosmic angle to this.
this sounds great. I love these suggestions. I always love when my TBR pile grows and I'm like, yeah, heck yeah.
Yeah, I she's really good at this. I know this has a sequel, and then she did a book called Small Favors, which is like a
Oh.
Rumpelstiltskin retelling, kind of
Ooh,
set in the American West. Like she's really good at like turning the fairy tale on its head and making
very
it horror.
nice. Yeah, I love that.
So that is House of Salt and Sorrows by Aaron C. Craig.
I just kind of piggybacking on what I said about stories that have kind of become fairy tales. I would love to suggest the spell book of Katrina von Tassel by Alyssa Palumbo. And it's the legend of Sleepy Hollow retold from Katrina's point of view, the one that Ichabod Crane is pursuing. And I think it's a romance, but it's definitely got like the gothic flavor. And so I love Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and if we're gonna talk Disney, I think their best adaptation is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I actually think it's a great adaptation. It's so funny that we've talked about like The Little Mermaid as a terrible adaptation, and so many of their adaptations are so sanitized. But I think they did a great job with The Legend of Sleepy Hollow cartoon. It's actually got a creepy vibe. It's very true to the original story. I mean, some of it comes directly from the story, and so like I was surprised at how much when I went 'cause I saw that cartoon as a kid. I always loved the spooky Disney cartoons like Night on Bald Mountain and any of the like weird kind of Halloweenish ones. But when I read the story, I was like, yeah, this is actually a really good adaptation, you know, and especially when you like compare and contrast that with like the way they did the Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is like one of the worst adaptations. I actually like the Disney cartoon, but it's like nothing like Victor Hugo's novel at
Yeah.
all, almost to like an embarrassing degree. I think the only person who dies in the cartoon is like the only person who lives. In the novel, it's like the bad guy. So it's like doesn't really it's Victor Hugo would not be happy, I don't think. But who knows? We always say that, but we don't
No.
know. Somebody could be like pop out of their grave like I'm totally cool with it. I don't care. But I do think the Legend of Sleepy Hollow Disney cartoon actually is a good adaptation, and I just love that story. I've actually been to Terrytown and into the cemetery and across like the little bridge that's the headless horseman bridge, and then like to Sunnyside, which is where Washington Irving lived there. So I'm a big Legend of Sleepy Hollow fan, and I really love the spellbook of Katrina von Tassel. I think it's such a interesting
Mm.
thing to like take it from her perspective. Like I always felt bad for Katrina, and I remember in college I actually wrote a paper comparing like how Ichabod looks at her and objectifies her in the same way he objectifies the foods at this thing. Like he just looks at her as an
Mm.
object in the same way that he like looks at all the foods as like all the sweet stuff as objects. So it's like I always love when we can kind of take and reclaim a character, and I think Alyssa did a great job with that. So I would definitely recommend the Spellbook of Katrina von Tassel. Again, it's like a gothic romance, so always want to make sure people know that so they don't go in expecting this to be like all out blood and guts horror. It's a very sweet, it's sad, but it's a great gothic
Oh,
romance.
I had not heard of this. So I will be adding it to my list. I had like two honorable mentions. One is a series. It is the Wayward Children series by Sean McGuire because they're so fun.
Yeah.
So this is a like portal fantasy, but it's essentially the children that go into these magical worlds, kind
Yes.
of like Alice in Wonderland,
Yeah.
and then they come back into the real world. What happens to them? like, they can't function in normal
Yeah.
society after they've spent, like, what they think is a lifetime or years in this, like,
Yeah.
magical world. So you're
Yeah.
following this kind of boarding school,
Yeah.
full of children who have come back from these magical worlds, and I
Yeah.
love the way that the world building is done and that there's, like, some worlds that are, like, high logic or,
Yeah.
low this, some worlds that are just, like, really silly, some worlds that are, like, bartering. You have to barter everything, information, food,
Mhm.
shelter,
Mhm.
everything is a barter system.
Yeah.
And, like, the odd numbered books are set at the school, and then the even numbered books are kind of like standalones, but they're following each children's story as they, like, go
Mhm.
into the world and what their world is like.
Yeah. Yeah, I always love stories that kind of deal with the aftermath because I think so often we get to
Yeah.
that happily ever after, and I always felt even when I was young, I'm like, well, what now? Like there is no happily ever after. It's that simple in real life, and I really love that these books really do explore like, well, what happens when these kids come back because they're going to be very changed, and there's going to be distance between them and all the other kids that didn't have this happen. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially the kids that, like, lived a whole lifetime. They're like, "And I slayed a
Mhm.
dragon, and I married a prince, and I was, like, the
Yeah.
queen."
Yeah.
And now I
Yeah.
come back and I'm in the 4th grade? Like, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then in preparation for this episode, I went to White Whale Books and I picked up a copy of White Cat, Black Dog by Kelly Link, thinking it might be a little darker than it actually was. But you know what? It was a fun collection and I'm not upset that I read it. But they are just like kind of weird, very whimsical, like modern, fairy tale retellings of like lesser known fairy tales. I think there is like one, I think there's like a Snow White one in there and maybe like a Red Riding Hood, but for the most part, they were all ones like I had not heard of. They were
Is
really
this
fun.
a newer collection or an older one?
I think it's newer.
Okay, so I haven't heard of that one, and I love some of her short fiction. I mean, everybody does, right? But I
Yeah.
think it can be
Yeah.
so inventive and go in such directions that I don't expect. So okay, I'm excited. Yay! Definitely pick that up.
Yeah, like there's ones with like talking cats that work at a weed farm and I was like, "Yeah, I love this. What are we doing? I don't know. It's fun."
Oh my gosh, I love
Uh,
that. I could totally see a cat doing that if it could talk, 100%. That's where a cat would end up.
dream job TBH. But it was funny, like, when I was checking out with this book, like, a random woman came up to me, she's like, "Is that White Cat, Black Dog by Kelly Link?" I said, "Yes, it is." She's like, "I want that whole book tattooed on my body. It's very good." I was like, "That's really intense." But, like, good to know. And then the girl checking me out was like, "I was gonna say good choice, but I think you kinda got that with her." So
I've not seen that one making rounds on social media, I don't think. So like yeah, social media is letting me down, which I could probably say a lot about a lot of different things. But yeah, I haven't seen it. Like I can't even picture the cover in my head.
just like I had the normal cover that's just kind of like
I have not seen that cover anywhere. Like that is wild to me. I don't know how like
but
I
then
have
look at
not.
this one. I've never seen this one. That one's beautiful.
Yeah, that one's great. Oh, okay. Well, definitely putting that on my to read list.
So those were my honorable mentions that I had to sneak in there. So if you have any other ones you wanna, like, talk about that weren't
You
your, like,
know,
official pick, go for it.
yeah. Well, I will say that one that's still going to be coming out in about 2 months now, I think, is Cynthia Palaio's "It Came from Neverland." So I got a chance to blurb that one. I don't want to like spoil it too much, but it's a Peter Pan retelling too. So I'll give that one
Ooh,
definitely a shout out as one to look for that's coming up soon. So yeah,
that's exciting, yeah.
yeah.
Well, on this podcast, I do like to ask our guests about a chilling obsession. So what is something in horror you've been enjoying lately?
I feel like I mostly like to say this one because I feel like if I can get a new fan for this movie, then I'm very happy. And because it's almost like a really dark fairy tale, I chose Eye of the Devil, which is an old black and white movie from the 1960s. It co-stars Sharon Tate, who I'm a huge fan of. It also has David Niven, Deborah Carr, David Hemmings. It's a folk horror, but it has a fairy tale feel. It's like this guy has to go back to his like ancestral land because like the crops are dying. It's very Wicker Man before the Wicker Man was a
Interesting.
thing. And it's sort of like the almost like the prototype for it, even though I don't know that they were aware of the movie. They probably were, right? I mean, but yeah, it's and then Sharon Tate plays this very witchy character. Her and her brother are just this like they kind of just live on the estate and they're just very weird and just serve this very creepy purpose of like being almost in the background of everything that's going on. So it's got a fairy tale feel. It's very dark, very grim in a lot of ways, but I love it. It's such a great movie. So yes, Eye of the Devil. If you haven't seen it, I would always recommend it.
I have not seen it, so I will have to check that out. Adding it to my list right now. Well, the second tradition we have on this podcast is to ask our guests for a final girl song. So, Gwendolyn, what is your song?
I love that she came up earlier, Florence Welch, because my pick is Witch by Florence and the Machine. I don't know that it was ever released on an album. It might have been. I remember finding it as almost like this kind of like single that was released or something on Spotify or Rhapsody or whatever I was using at that time to stream music. But it's a great song and it's like from the perspective of this witch from like olden times and it's got a very fairy tale feel to it and I just love it so much. So yeah, but I think it's so perfect that we already talked about Florence Welch loving Valerie and her Week of
Yes.
Wonders because I feel like that the vibes of Florence and the Machine are so fairy tale in that kind of very dark horror way. So it's very perfect.
Oh, she goes like perfectly into that. And I feel also kind of like the reclamation of like Mother Maiden Crone
Yes, yeah, very
of
much,
it
very
all.
much.
All right. Well, I will be adding that to the playlist. Gwendolyn, thank you so much for coming on here today and talking to me about fairy tale horror.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Oh my gosh, this was so much fun.
Books in the Freezer is a bi weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and TikTok at Books in the Freezer, or send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. If you would like to support the podcast, there are a few ways to do that. One of those is to use our affiliate links in the episode description of this episode and most episodes. I will have linked versions of the titles mentioned, and those links will go to our bookshop.org storefront, where your purchase will support an independent bookstore and this podcast. You can also become part of our Patreon community at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer, where there are a lot of perks like getting episode releases early, getting to read the cold read newsletter, and access to The House at the End of Fear Street, a Patreon exclusive podcast where I and different guests are reading our way through R.L. Stein's Fear Street series. You don't want to miss it. We have so much fun there. Again, all of that is at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. If you would like to support the podcast without spending any money, there are also a lot of ways to do that. You can do that by leaving a review on a site like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or posting about it on a site like Instagram or Threads. Spreading the word. Word of mouth is huge, especially for small indie podcasts like this one. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. And also participating, joining in on the Books in the Freezer reading challenge, commenting on episodes. All things like that are huge and important and impactful. So thank you again. I have been your host, Stephanie. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time on Books in the Freezer.